Hello and welcome to beroNet's webinar today on how to connect an ISDN PBX with a SIP trunk, and of course doing that without changing the ISDN PBX itself. My name is Jeff and I will be taking you all the way through this webinar today. If for some reason you do not understand me or if I am speaking too quickly, please let me know. My colleagues tend to remind me that I like to talk really fast. That said, there are a few other items that I'd like to cover at the beginning of this webinar. First, this webinar is being recorded, so don't worry, there is a recording and it will be posted on the same page you used to sign up for the webinar. That means just go back to the same landing page, maybe this afternoon, possibly tomorrow, and you'll be able to see the recording to this webinar. Second is that this is the second in a series of webinars. The first webinar was an in-depth introduction to beroNet and beroNet products. So if you want more details on the features of the products, the modularity, cloud access, stuff like that, go ahead and watch the previous webinar. You can find it with this link here. And that will really just give you that information. For those of you that were already there, I really don't want to go through everything over and over again. That's a little bit boring. So if you don't have that information, go ahead and watch that first webinar. Of course, under this link, you will also see all the other webinars I have planned for this year. I think it's all the way through June or July, and you can sign up for those as well. Next is I'm going to answer the questions towards the end of the webinar. I'm doing that mostly because this webinar is extremely technical, and if I get distracted, I might tell you something wrong, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to go through each item here in the webinar today, explain it to the best of my ability. If you have questions, please write them as soon as you have the question. Don't wait, just write it in the box. I'm just not going to look at it until the end of the webinar. That said, once again, thank you all for joining. Today, I'm seeing here in the attendee list, we have people from all around the globe. I'm recognizing some people I know here as well. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started in this. So just to make sure that everybody has a general idea, I'm not going to go in detail, but we today are talking about VoIP gateways. These are translation devices that allow you to connect multiple telecommunication technologies with each other. They all run on the same operating system, so everything I show you today is going to work with everything that we provide that is a VoIP gateway. So whether it's a boxed version or a PCIe card, yeah, what I show you today will work with all of those. I'm also today using a GSM gateway. I am not going to be telling you about the GSM functionality of that gateway, but you'll see in the GUI today that there is GSM there. So yeah, that is an availability. I will probably do a webinar in the future on GSM gateways. Just keep your ear out for that. Okay, and so today we are covering the all IP scenario. This is connecting an ISDN PBX with a SIP trunk using a gateway. The scenario today is going to look a little bit like this. Sorry, it's a little bit small, but I have a network switch and then I have a gateway connected with another gateway. Now, this gateway is going to be simulating an ISDN PBX. We are never going to access this. It is already prepared. It is standardized to a specific number, so I have to make the number format and match it, or the gateway has to somehow do that in order to communicate with this simulated ISDN PBX. With that, there is an analog phone connected, and I'll be using that to test things like caller ID, just so that we're not simply saying, here, fill this information in and it's always going to work. That's not always the case. Sometimes you have to modify some of the settings to match your SIP trunk or to match how that ISDN PBX has been configured. So I will even go in and tell you how to find the configuration of that ISDN PBX without actually accessing the PBX itself. That said, we're going to be configuring this gateway today, and what I have in this one is 2 GSM, 2 BRI, and 2 FXS, but all we're going to be using is the 2 BRI. And then I have a SIP trunk from a SIP trunk provider in Germany that will be connecting with that and getting everything working. So I'm going to take a short pause right now, and I've gone through a couple slides. Now is the time to tell me, can you see my screen? Can you see my slides? And can you hear me? Please, everybody in the questions box, please write yes, no. Perfect. Thank you all for doing that. Fantastic. Then I am going to go ahead and move forward. Okay, so the way this webinar is going to go is I have slides guiding the presentation, and then I'm going to go into the GUI of the gateway itself and show you the steps. That way I don't miss something. So the first thing you do when you log into the GUI, when you're trying to do this setup, is you want to connect set the hardware settings so that they can communicate with the right type of device. So in the GUI, you can actually do that. You can select whether it's TE or NT, whether you want to connect it with an ISDN line, so an ISDN provider, or if you want to connect it with an ISDN device. Clearly, an ISDN PBX will be considered an ISDN device. So the first thing we want to do is go into the GUI and do that. So I'll go ahead and slide over to my other browser here. I'll type in the default credentials. This is a non-setup gateway, so it's admin. And here I am logged in. Well, it does already have a cloud setup, but otherwise it's empty. And so the first thing I'll go in here is into hardware. Click on that. And here you can see the hardware settings. What's great about this screen is it's also going to tell you which port is where. So these are the 4 ports on the front of the device, and you can see that port 1 is BRI, port 2 is BRI, port 3 is FXS, port 4 is FXS, then GSM is in a tray above all of that. All right, so I'll come into the hardware settings. I'm using port 1 today, so I'll go ahead and take port 1. I'll select NT so it can connect with an ISDN PBX system, and everything else here is exactly how I want it. Synchronization port just tells you where you're getting your synchronization from for clock synchronization. Right. And then I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Now, you're going to see a red activate here. And the red activate, basically what it's going to do is going to stop all current calls. It's going to apply the settings and reboot the device. Not necessarily in that order, but that's the list of things that will happen. Now, there are 2 other activates you're going to see. There's an orange activate, which stops all the calls and applies settings, and a yellow activate, which simply applies the settings. Generally, you see the red activate when you change hardware settings. You see the orange activate when you change something like grouping, port grouping, things like that will be an orange activate. And then a yellow activate is simple things like modifying a Dialplan rule. Right. You do not need to click activate each time you see it. I've talked with a lot of our customers, and they click the activate time and they tell me, oh, it takes so long to activate and I have to click it between all the time. Don't click it each time. It just takes more time to activate, and you're sitting there. You can actually go through and do all the settings as long as you click these save buttons and then apply them only once when you click activate. So we'll go ahead and move on to that next item here, which is going to be port grouping. So we have our hardware setup so that it can now communicate with the ISDN PBX. Now we need to make sure there's a port group that we can then use in the Dialplan. So what port groups do is it basically sets up all the settings that the gateway is going to use to communicate with a device attached to that port. So you're going to set your ISDN tone sets. You're going to specify your country and city codes, which we then use in like an internal algorithm, which then tries to help automate the whole setup process, so you don't have to worry about some of the caller ID stuff. And then it's going to determine how the channels will be selected, whether if you have lots of channels, whether it's going to be round robin or other ways of selecting channels. So we'll go ahead and create that ISDN group now. So here I'm going to go into PSTN ISDN BRI. Go ahead and select that. And then I'm going to click Add. Now with that, I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it BRI. Now let's do ISDN-PBX. I'll select the port I want to use. Clearly, you can do multiple ports in a group, but if you plan to direct calls differently to each port, you'll want to have 2 different groups. And then here I can click Save. And there we go. Now what you saw there was the easy interface. There actually is an easy and an advanced interface. And today I'm actually going to be using the advanced interface. I'm going to go ahead and click Advanced, and we'll go back in and modify some more of those settings. Okay, so as you can see, there are a lot more options here. Okay, so I am in Germany, so I'm going to keep the German tone set. Of course, we have tone sets for pretty much any country you're going to be in. Interdigit timeout, I'll keep. All these defaults are usually going to be perfectly fine for you. All I'm going to do now is add my country code and my city code. And then I'm going to click Save. Okay, so now that we have the ISDN group, next what we want to do is add a SIP trunk. In the SIP trunk settings, it's essentially going to determine how the gateway is going to read the SIP header, how the gateway is going to translate your ISDN connection into a SIP header where it gets all this information from. It's going to do caller ID mapping, select the codecs you want to be able to use with the device. It's going to set up failover accounts. If you want to have multiple SIP trunks with failover SIP trunks, you can do that. And you can also choose how the destination number will be formatted. It's all these individual items determined by your SIP provider. So we'll go ahead and go into the SIP settings under SIP and then add. And what you can do is we do have a lot of provider templates. There's a small list that's automatically in the device. However, if you go to our wiki, wiki.beroNet.com, there's a section under the gateways that then allows you to get all these other templates. I'll actually show you that real quick. Just so that you have that and where you can find that. And if you're using a provider often, and you're always doing the same provider over and over and over again, and you wish there was a template for it, do let us know. I'll show you the benefit of the templates after I finish doing this all manually. And then we can use a full trace that you send us to develop a new template, and we'll just mark the template as managed by a partner. So here you can see I can go into Germany, and just in Germany alone, there are a lot more providers here than what we have in the GUI itself. And to do that, for example, let's just go to people phone here. Just click this, and then up here, download, to download that template. And then in the GUI, we'll just go there quick, profile management, and upload that template, right? So that's how you upload and download templates. And again, if you have a provider you use commonly and you wish there's a template for it, just talk to us and we can get one set up for you. All right, so now adding this, I'm not going to use a template. We're going to do it manually because there are many people that have providers that are not with templates. And I want to show you how to get it so it works each time. So I'm going to add here SIP trunk for the name. And let me find my data here. There we go. For the, I'm just going to put this in both of these. You really only need to fill in one unless you have specific and different data each time. And then I'm going to add a username, which sometimes is the actual phone number. So if you want to mess with my presentation today, record that phone number. Please don't. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the password. And this is, I need to register with the trunk. And for this one, I need to validate. It's just dependent on your SIP trunk, get the information from them. And then I'm going to save it. In the ideal world, that would now function perfectly the way we want it to. Now, in the Dialplan, I'll go ahead and go back to the presentation and talk about the Dialplan sum. You're going to want to create two rules at this point. We may end up modifying these rules later as needed. And I'll show you how to do that, of course. But to start out, we're going to build two rules, one that sends all traffic from SIP to ISDN, and a second rule that sends all traffic from ISDN to SIP. Now, some things to note about the Dialplan is, of course, it determines how the gateway handles calls. So you might have set up the SIP trunk, and you may have set up the grouping, but if you don't set up a Dialplan, nothing's going to happen. That's an easy mistake to make, especially if you're doing it over and over and over again. You just assume it's there sometimes, and then you forget the Dialplan, and it doesn't work. But oftentimes, the first thing you're going to do in troubleshooting is make sure you have a Dialplan. Another note is it runs top to bottom. So with that said, everything's run on regular expressions here. If you have a specific rule that we're saying send all the boss's phone calls over its own trunk, for example, or all international phone calls that use this prefix over this, trunk, then you're going to want to put those specific rules to the top and make sure that there's no general rule above it that gets taken. So essentially it's going to go first rule, does it match? Yes, no. If no, second rule. Okay. And so as I mentioned, a customization is available using regular expressions. Your imagination is the limit to that. It's really quite customizable. There's even a comments field in the rule, so you can comment on the rule to make sure the next person that enters the gateway knows what that rule is for. Also important if lots of people are managing your customers. And then the way the regular expressions essentially work is you have variables contained in these parentheses, brackets. So you have these two variables, this variable here, and everything inside the variable is uncounted. So I have one variable here, and I'm calling that first variable, which is that slash. If I have multiple variables, then I can use /1, /2, however I need to do to call those variables. The dot is equal to any digit. So here I have a dot and then a star, an asterisk. The asterisk just says whatever comes after the dot is going to be accepted. So anything in that string is going to be accepted. Right. And I'll go through some additional rules potentially a little later. So let's go ahead and go into the Dialplan and make these rules. So I'm going to go ahead and add, and from direction SIP to direction ISDN. And then I needed a reverse rule. So I'm going to go ahead and click reverse rule so that it automatically generates that. And just as a good practice, I'm going to say sends all calls to ISDN or in reverse rule to SIP. And then click save. There we go. So now I have the Dialplan rules, I have my SIP trunk connected, and I have my ISDN PBX connected. I can now activate. So we'll go ahead and do that. It's a red activate. So recall it's going to restart the device. So while it's activating, it's going to take just a minute. And while it's activating, I'm going to look at the next slide. Okay, so in the ideal world, at that point, everything's going to work for you. But different SIP trunks function differently. Different ISDN PBXs are configured differently. Sometimes they accept international telephone numbers. Sometimes they only accept local telephone numbers. And the way to really see how that ISDN PBX is configured is after you have it connected with the gateway, start a Dialplan debug or a full trace and make a call from internal, so through the ISDN PBX to external. And in that call, you're going to be able to see some details about how the ISDN PBX expects to send and receive numbers. So here, what I have here is down here, setup indication port 1, channel 1, DAD is the call that is the number we're calling, and OAD is the number, is the caller ID, essentially an ISDN. So here I can see that it's only accepting a local number right here. It's not going to accept my area code for the specific ISDN PBX, and it's not going to accept my international code. It's only going to allow me to make calls with a local number. Sometimes it'll be more flexible, but sometimes if you don't get that number formatting exactly as the ISDN PBX expects it, it's simply not going to accept the call. Right, so that's the outgoing call. Let's see if I notice anything else in there that we should look at the moment. I don't think so. I'm going to go ahead and log back into that gateway, and let's make that outgoing call. Okay, so as you can see, we're in the status page. My ISDN line is now active. Everything's green. It's working beautifully. And my SIP trunk is now active. Everything's green. It's also working beautifully. All right, so I'm going to go into management and Dialplan debug. I'm going to go ahead and start this. And it still comes up as a pop-up. So you have to accept pop-ups. Keep that in mind. And then I'll start it again. And now we have this started. Now I'm going to make an external call from my analog phone here. All right. And then sometimes it just takes a minute to see everything. Perfect. I'll go ahead and pick up the call, turn off the call, and hang up the phone. All right, so now we have that exact same thing I showed you. We have the Dialplan debug. We can see the OAD here is the caller ID it's sending. That's likely how that ISDN PBX is also going to want to receive those calls. You can get into more detail. There are a couple other things that you can look at, and I'll show you that towards a little bit later with a full trace, and I'll also talk about how to read that full trace. But for the majority of the time, I'm hoping it makes it a lot easier. The Dialplan debug will just cover that information for you. All right, so now we know how the gateway is expecting numbers. Let's go ahead and see if my gateway is already set up to do that. Sometimes the gateway has this cool little wizard built into it that automatically figures this out and does that for you. So I'm going to go ahead and start this again just to save myself time down the road. And now I'm going to call the number. Answer it and then hang it up. Okay, so there we go. Now we've got it all. All right, so now we can see a little bit about how this call is done. Let's jump back into the slide real quick and look at it here. So for SIP, this is how the SIP usually is formatted. So you have here the from display name is empty. So from display name is empty. From user is before the @ symbol, and the server comes after the @ symbol. So we can see here that invite from beroNet's primary telephone number to this telephone number through EasyBell. And so we have all that wonderful thing. And so now it's trying to set up the request to the ISDN PBX. And you can see DAD, this is the number that's being called, and OAD is empty, which means that it's not sending anything for caller ID. That's not good. So we have that as a problem we'll need to solve. Let's go ahead and keep going through it. Connection, perfect, send disconnect, then it sends the buy request, and everything else looks like it's working perfectly fine. Okay, so now we need to figure out the OAD. The OAD is your caller ID. And from what I can see here, there's nothing here, so I'm assuming what the gateway is doing is it's trying to take the OAD from this from display name section, and there's no number there, obviously. And so what we need to do is make sure that there's a number there. So we need to go back into the gateway and set it up so it sends it from user instead of from display name. Okay, so go back into my gateway, and this is under the SIP settings. So we'll go ahead and modify this. All right. This setting is going to be under more. And then where is it? Dialplan source. There it is. So here you can see from display. So that's why it didn't give me a caller ID on that call. And what I want to do is from user. There we go. Pretty simple fix. And if we looked at that, there was no display part there. From user part wasn't there. I'm going to go ahead and change this just to do it to new source, just so that there's something there. Okay, so I'll click save and activate. This is a yellow activate, so it should be pretty quick. There we go. And now let's go ahead and go back into that Dialplan debug. Start it up again, or it's still running here. Let's go ahead and clear it. All right, and then make the call again. Looking at the display, now I have a number, fantastic. Go ahead and answer it. Hang it up, reload, fantastic. Okay, so now we can see here that in the OAD, we now have a number, and the gateway is automatically dropping that number down into the format the ISDN PBX will expect based on some other rules. If you want it to be different, then talk with us and we'll tell you how to work around that. Yeah, so the caller ID is now working. Fantastic. Let's go ahead and go back into the slides. All right, so that was the setup. That's the general setup. It's basically all the stuff you're going to need to know. Now, if that caller ID did not work, let me look at my slides real quick. Do I have one? I do not. Okay, if the caller ID did not work and you need to reformat that number, there's a couple ways to do it. The quickest and easiest way in my mind, I mean, there's some tricks in the SIP settings as well, but is to use the regular expressions here. So let's just, as a theoretical, say that the gateway is sending an international number to the ISDN PBX, and the ISDN PBX requires that you send a local number. Okay, that's the theoretical. So we have here ISDN PBX to SIP. We have here SIP to ISDN PBX. We want to modify this rule then. All right. So destination, if the SIP trunk always sends a destination with the 0049 plus city code, you can go ahead and enter that in before here. That way it's only, of course, if you do that, it only accepts the 004930 as the destination code. So if for some reason you have different ones, keep that in mind. But in this case, I only have one SIP trunk and it's only doing this, so I'll go ahead and leave it. And then it's going to take the first variable, which means what's going to happen is, let's say the number is 493025938890, right? This here is now the first variable, right? And so that's the first variable, and that's all that's going to be taken and sent to the ISDN PBX system. So that's how that is going to work. Useful, especially if you have different extent. I mean, theoretically, you could put that number in here. Whoops. But by doing that, you don't accept any other numbers. So if you have extensions or ends on here, like an extension, then it's not going to accept that, right? You're not going to get that sent in. So it's always better to work with the variable and have it like that. Okay. There we go with that. Go ahead and just close out of that. We don't need to save it. And now we're going to talk about the full trace. The full trace is a more complex version of the Dialplan debug. It really includes every single setting in the gateway itself. It's also the bread and cream of support. So if you need support from us for any time, any reason, just include a full trace and we'll be able to see almost everything about your gateway. Full trace with a little diagram of the scenario or a description of the scenario, what it's connected to, which technologies, all that fun stuff. Gives us all we need to know to see exactly what's happening, what's going wrong, and help you fix that. So the full trace is also a powerful tool for you. And we'll go through this in just very little detail. Just run a full trace. All you have to do is click start, and then you are going to, pretend to do your calls, or if it's an activate issue and something's not registering, you could, for example, go now into SIP, open up the SIP, save it, click activate again, and then we have all that data guaranteed in that trace of it trying to register, right? So if something's not registering for some reason, that's how you're going to want to do that and double check it. Right. And so then once you're done with making the calls or checking the registration, all that fun stuff, go ahead and click stop on the full trace. And then you can download the debug files. Now, most of these files are either text files or can be read in Wireshark. So that's download right there. Just click that and it'll download the files for you. And now we're going to go through that a little bit. And the two things you're going to be looking for most commonly, especially if you're working with ISDN PBX system and the SIP trunk, and the SIP trunk is very special and it requires a P-asserted identity or a P-preferred identity, or maybe it's sending one, and so it's being pulled into the ISDN PBX and the code for some reason and you don't want it. Those are things you'll want to look at. So I'll go ahead and find the Dialplan, or the trace I took earlier, and open up Wireshark. All right. And then I'll go ahead and pull this up as well. Let's go over here. All right, so this is a trace here. And as you can see, there's debug text, kind of just giving some general information about the device. Don't need to worry about that. Most of the time, if it's a SIP issue, you're going to be looking at TCP dump, which will be read in Wireshark. Some of the ISDN debugs, if there's an ISDN issue, you can read also in Wireshark and have all of that there. Right. So we're going to read this one. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this down so I can work my two screens and simply drag it in. All right, that's what I wanted. Okay, so here we have the trace. You can see the source to my gateway, gateways, destination, all that fun stuff. Okay, so now what I want to do is find the p-asserted identity. And so let's go ahead and look in this right here. Go into session nation protocol header. So it looks like the SIP trunk that I'm using right now isn't even providing that information, so they're not going to want it either. Let's look at this one. So that's not something we're going to need to concern about that SIP trunk, but if I look at the request from the gateway, you can see here that I am adding that information. Now, if your SIP trunk doesn't like that or doesn't accept it, that might be an issue. And you'll want to modify the settings in the gateway to remove that. But that's just where you can find that information, what to do with it. Check out our wiki, talk to our support team, and they'll give you more details on that if it's becoming a problem for you. So if for some reason something's not registering, a call's not going through, you can do the Dialplan debug. If that's all you want to do, cool. Open a support ticket, we'll help you with the rest. But then you can also look into whether or not you can pull the information you need from the p-asserted identity for that ISDN PBX. Okay, so we've successfully connected a SIP trunk with the gateway using with the gateway and then with the ISDN PBX so that you can now make calls from an ISDN PBX to a SIP trunk. Of course, we also offer training that goes into this in a bit more detail, gives you a chance to do it hands-on, so you'll have the devices at your location, be able to test with all this similar to how I've done here. And get a call working with your preferred provider or the series of providers you work with for your customers, and get that all prepared before you actually take a device to the customer location and work on it there. Always good to test it first. That said, for the training, you can also become a partner once completing the training, and that gives you access to our beroNet cloud service, essential management console of sorts, where you can manage all of your beroNet devices they have installed at any of your customer locations. It also gets you a bit more discount on beroNet products. So if you sell lots of beroNet products and you want to make a little bit more margin on that, being a partner certainly helps with that. And of course, when we bring out new products, you are the first, or our partners are the first ones who get a beta test those and work with those, and they get them for pretty good pricing. And then we also in Berlin host partner events from time to time where we do an advanced training. So that would be when we actually go over the p-asserted identity, where we go through the new products and how those are going to work, and all that fun stuff happens at our partner trainings. And then of course, you get to tell your customers that you're a partner using our logo so that your customers know that when you're installing beroNet technologies, whether it's the gateway like I showed you today, or one of our other devices like an appliance, a failover switch, that you're certified on these devices and know how to use them, and that you have a direct connection with the manufacturer. That said, the training is very much similar to what we've done today. In fact, it is essentially what we've done today, with the exception that you're going to use your own SIP trunk to get that call working. And for that, you do require the devices. Instead of the GSM one, you're going to have a 4 BRI gateway, a 2 FXS, and 2 BRI gateway to do that ISDN PBX, and then you'll do the calls through that to the SIP trunk, just like we did today. The training goes into more detail with SIP to SIP, using the gateway as an SBC, and some of those other items in there. And then, of course, the training is as good for you as you invest into it. So there's ways to make it more realistic, more difficult, different things that force you to try different things. And if you want to do that, talk with me and I'll give you more tips on how to do that. The MSRP value, so the sales value of the devices would be 1,498 euros, which is a lot for a training. So we've reduced that a bit for our partner applicants. You can get them at $9.99. And then of course, these devices you're getting are for your training, of course, but if you want to resell them, you also can do that. Right. And I didn't mention it, I'm going to mention it. The training kit does come with one on-demand support ticket, which I love that it does that. Because as you're doing the training, if you have questions, if something's not working, you can save all those up and then do an on-demand support session with one of our support technicians, ask all your questions, ask them to do something with you, show you how to do something. That hour is yours to work with that support agent to do that. So that's an excellent part of the package as well. Definitely use it. If you're able to do everything without the on-demand support ticket, then of course you have it for yourself later on when you're doing an installation. If you encounter an issue, you have that as well. All right, that was the sales pitch to the training webinar. I do hope that a lot of you today want to become partners. Do send me an email. Email is sales@beroNet.com. I'll get you set up on the next step to do that. If you just don't want to do that, that's also cool. After this webinar today, you are going to receive an email from me with a link in it. And this is going to be basically asking you to do a survey. Now, these surveys are important to me personally because it helps me make better webinars in the future. So I'm asking all of you to click on that link in that email, do that survey so I know what did I do well here, what should I have presented more, maybe I spent too much time on something. Let me know about that. And also, you also have an option to submit ideas for other webinars. So let's say, okay, great, I've learned a lot, but I want to learn more about P-asserted identities, P-preferred identities, and all that fun stuff. Let me know, and I'll be able to do that in a webinar dedicated to that. That said, I'm looking through the questions right now, and it appears I've answered all of them during the webinar, which is really cool. If there are any other questions, now's your chance. I'll go ahead and wait a few minutes just in case somebody is typing out a very complex question. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions, but just to give you guys a bit more time, because sometimes people come in with questions last minute, I'm going to go ahead and go to surveymonkey.com, I think it is, and then beroNet webinar, there we are. That is the URL for the survey. If you guys want to go ahead and just do that before you get the email, you can, just surveymonkey.com/r/beroNet webinar, and that'll be the whole survey for you. Again, please do that. It really helps me make better webinars in the future. All right, still not getting questions, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you all for joining today. The recording will be posted on that landing page probably this afternoon or at the latest tomorrow. And once it's posted, you will all receive an email. Thank you again. My name is Jeff. Very happy to share this information with you. If you have any more questions, just send me an email to sales@beroNet.com. I'll be happy to answer those, or one of my colleagues will be happy to answer those for you. All right, hope you all have a great rest of the day, and thank you all very much. Take care.